Well, here we go again, folks. A little late, I realize, but hopefully still timely and relevant. So, with Title 42, as I understand it, now officially lifted as of last week, our already disastrous border crisis and migrant situation is sadly expected to go from bad to worse. Much worse, in fact. Oh, but who are we kidding or trying to kid for that matter? Let's be real. After all, we're all adults here. The situation hit worse a long time ago, and now we need to brace ourselves for something that, as I see it, will be cataclysmically catastrophic, leaving people like you and me to bear the biggest burden and pay the biggest price. Did anyone at all pay close enough attention and realize how quickly the compassionate yet affluent liberal left and the wealthy woke up and just like that expelled the very same so-called refugees from their turf, booted them right out of Martha's Vineyard, and what, like in only a matter of hours? If memory serves me and I recall correctly, in just 24 hours after Ron DeSantis so benevolently rather, did them a favor and paid for these immigrants to pay a visit to one of America's greatest and most well-known retreats, an elite enclave, if you will, that exemplifies to perhaps the fullest extent a life that can supposedly be achieved by pursuing the proverbial American dream, the very reason these immigrants are supposedly risking their lives for, and why we, the people, need to now show them compassion and leniency. The very same compassion and leniency the inhabitants of the vineyards did not show them, at least not for very long. Instead, sadly and ironically, these unclean individuals were shown a little mercy just for show and primarily while the cameras were rolling, and then, as you well know, shown the door. A door these same elites, affluents, and well-established inhabitants of the vineyard expect us to open for their apparently unwanted guests. Remember, folks, actions speak volumes louder than words, and it's the empty bottles that make the most noise. With that said out of the way and off the table, let's ask ourselves, why then would these same sophisticates, the vineyard locals, presume that we the people, the average Joes and Janes of society, would want their outcasts? Good question, right? So let's chew on it for a while. Okay, so now if you've listened to my previous rant called New York, Taxation Without Representation, Blue State, Blue Shift, then you already know that I'm personally not entirely against immigration. In fact, I realize and know full well that most nations were built by immigrants, and those, of course, seeking a truly better life and greater opportunities. A better life and greater opportunities for themselves, their children, their families, and of course, for future generations. And to be honest, what were our founding fathers? Our founding fathers were themselves immigrants seeking asylum from tyranny, the king, and of England, a freedom they fought for. But we are now not talking about the same type of immigrant. As General Washington stated just before the Battle of Bunker Hill, as he addressed his small army of men going up against England's amazing army, the enemy has landed, and now the honor and success of America depends on you. Today, it depends on you and me. He further noted that the world would soon learn what a few brave men fighting for their own land could do. And yet, here we are, currently living in a country our forefathers fought to escape. This primarily because today we have no brave men, no warriors, no real leaders, and no one brave enough to stand up for the future of America, or any country for that matter, and no one willing or valiant enough to fight for their own land or nation and the fundamental tenets it was built upon. Instead, what we do have is an open door policy and lack of immigration protocol that is attracting mostly, though not all, and I do not want to be guilty of painting everyone with the same broad brushstroke, but again, attracting mostly the least favorable and least desirable individuals from around the globe. You know, those seeking free handouts rather than the chance to work hard, build a better life, and improve our country and their new home, as they also improve their own lives, and again, the lives of their families, their children, and future generations. Yes, obviously, and undoubtedly, the Statue of Liberty rather, does proclaim, give me your poor, your tired, huddled masses, etc., etc., etc. But nowhere does she mention dangerous desperados, social pariahs, and or lazy asses, which in my opinion is what we're up against now. Again, not entirely opposed to immigration. My mother, in fact, is a U.S. immigrant who made her way over legally 50 plus years ago, as is my husband, who came over from the Great White North legally 20 years ago. And let me not forget to mention or bring to your attention that myself, my mother, and my son are all immigrants to Canada, with my son's case, believe it or not, still open for review and with no clear end in sight. And by the way, the boy is 10 now. The process began 6 years ago when he was only 4. My point in telling you this? Well, obviously, if Canada, a nation known at least traditionally as a country easier on immigration, which is, by the way, why so many from around the globe chose it as their home, well, that and the fact that it is a truly and profoundly beautiful country, just with seemingly less opportunity and horrible policy and a horrible leader, yet which somehow currently adheres to such strict vetting standards for a child, then shouldn't it stand to reason that the United States, a revered, supposed global leader, implement at bare minimum the same vetting standards for adults? Adults from God knows where we know nothing about? Sure, I have a heart, a big heart as a matter of fact. Sometimes too big, just ask my family. But unlike most of those in charge, I also have a brain. And my brain tells me that our heartless open border policies leave actual citizens of the United States, you know, those who were born here, played by the rules, made their way over legally, and who helped build and or defend the nation, vulnerable. Vulnerable to the overwhelming cascade of questionable immigrants pouring into our country, pouring into our states, our communities, and our neighborhoods, while we the people, continue to live in ever-increasing poverty, despair, squalor, devastation, decay, and above all, fear. The duty of our politicians and the powers that be is to protect the people, the same people who gave them their power, their prestige, and their cushy positions. The very same power, prestige, and cushy positions that has allowed, or should I say afforded them, to live in luxury far, far away from the menacing mayhem. It is therefore, at least in my opinion, not heartless, inhumane, or racist, but rather imperative to call out the obvious and call for a halt to this mass inundation of outside entrants. Entrants who make their way over and are welcome with open arms, but without rules, without regulations, and or without consequences. A saturation that has resulted in a mass exodus of once loyal citizens, sadly leaving them with few to no options, nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. Still, sadly, many of those our officials claim they are trying to save are not by any means or stretch of the imagination plowing through our open borders in the cloak of night to be saved, but rather to destroy our nation or nations, because to some extent this has become the new normal for most leaders and in most countries, as most leaders all study the same sordid playbook. To destroy our lifestyles, destroy our peace, destroy our serenity, destroy our safety, even destroy our families, and ultimately the American dream and the American way of life. This devastating, yet as I see it, very deliberate destruction they are accomplishing via human trafficking and the smuggling in of drugs, including, fentanyl, an extremely deadly drug, which has left its indelible and devastating effects and tragic toll on the people, on families, and on our and many nations around the globe. But once again, we must ask ourselves, who is to blame? Who is truly to blame? First and foremost are ruthless, unscrupulous, self-centered, and power-hungry leaders. They, the powers at large, are the ones who are working in clandestine cohort with the outside assailants, who are declaring war on everything we, the people, hold sacred. In fact, we have become easy prey for those in power, as they are the ones who have advocated for, continue to advocate for, and implement these loose, lax, and almost non-existent restrictions. And who have no problem turning a blind eye to the human trafficking and the illegal contraband being carted over in droves. And in fact, in my opinion, works in their favor, especially as it relates to promoting their salacious agenda. In fact, it is these same self-proclaimed humanitarian heads of states and heads of nations that, while busy and hard at work banning gas-powered cars and gas stoves, just to name a few, are also busy and hard at work legalizing weed and other potentially dangerous and nefarious narcotics. Even creating safe spaces in professional work environments for addicts. And I'm old enough to remember having to take a drug test to prove you were not using before being given the honor and privilege of being hired. But this is their solution. This, rather than doing the noble thing, the right thing, and getting these people, the addicts, the much needed and probably much appreciated help that would benefit them, benefit their families, benefit their neighborhoods, benefit their communities, and benefit our nation or nations as a whole. Well, it is, after all, a very lucrative business for the wheelers, aka politicians and dealers alike. And of course, it's obviously easier to rule, or should I say implement mind control over, those who've abdicated their own mind to illicit vices and no longer have any sense, sensibility, or a mind of their own. However, my personal problem, as much as it is with the politicians, is with the people. Not only the users, abusers, and dealers, but those who continue to give them a voice, who have accepted and embraced and support this new normal. Essentially, what these people are telling me, the ones that are on board and okay with normalizing the abnormal and aberrant, is that despite their impressive levels of status and or education, they are in actuality, for lack of a better or more polite term, stupid. Why else would anyone need to condone embracing life or condoning others to embrace life in a manner that, in my opinion, enables, maybe even glorifies, living in a stupefied state? And how else can you justify them enabling others to continue on a downward spiral that is destroying not only those caught in this tangled web, but those that love them, as well as our society and our nation and the world as a whole? The masses, like I've said before, more often than not, the M is silent, have become nothing more than bleating sheeple with no direction, no ambition, and seemingly no purpose. In fact, most mask their lack of desire for anything desirable as minimalist living, a new term, a new way of life that takes the focus off family, off home, off yard work, and off almost any responsibility, giving the same people more time to enjoy life, as they like to put it. And many of these same modern-day hapless hippies sadly have also bought into Timothy Leary's ideology, luring them into a lifestyle of tuning in, turning on and dropping out. Those that seek out these salacious substances, as well as those who fundamentally justify this newfangled fad sweeping the nation and the globe, are essentially admitting that life is not very exciting, and that those in their life are quite boring, perhaps. In fact, they are inadvertently admitting that they simply can't and or don't know how to live, have fun, or enjoy life without external assistance. How very sad. Moreover, how very shallow. If we are to be honest, lots of people have endured hardships, some much, much greater than the ones we face today. Looking back, the Revolutionary War, slavery, the Civil War, the Civil Rights Movement, the Great Depression, illness, single parenthood, and the list goes on. But it seems to me that the past generations that made our nations great rose above the noise and above the confusion and met their challenges head on, rather than looking out or looking for cry closets and safe spaces or escapes. And it is because of them that we have the freedoms and liberties we have today. And because of them that we once proudly proclaimed our accomplishments and our greatness. And for those college kids out there who are risking being poisoned, looking for Xanax to calm their jitters, or pills to give them that extra boost or oomph to stay up through the night and study for exams, kindly remember, some of us did and faced all that before you. Only we did it while trying to keep up our grades so we didn't lose our scholarships, while in relationships, while holding down full-time jobs, and the list goes on. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, anyone? If you haven't seen her movie or read her story, I strongly suggest you do. And we did it all, and much more, without the aid of outside and potentially life-threatening substances. Our current fentanyl fiasco, depressing and devastating as it truly is, but it's also a self-inflicted wound, with the dealers and our leaders simply taking advantage of a weak, pathetic population, one in desperate need of intervention, personal empowerment, professional help, and God, or at least some form of spiritual guidance. Instead of evolving, we have sadly devolved into a population that has little to no ambition, no dignity, no pride, unless it pertains to pronouns, and no self-worth, and that has voluntarily given permission and ammunition to the salacious predators, while we, the people, continue to spiral down the rabbit hole of self-destruction. But actually, it's just a simple matter of basic supply and demand. Economics 101, if you will. Really want to stop fentanyl overdoses and clean up our streets of vagrants and homelessness? It's not a hard thing to do. Let's start by getting people off drugs, not legalizing them or passing laws to legalize more of them, while also creating safe havens for users and abusers. And let's stop focusing on excusing or justifying drug usage, just so, once again, the rich and powerful can grow even more rich and even more powerful off our backs and off our suffering. Always remember that whether we're talking about human trafficking or drugs, if there was no demand, there would also be no supply, or at least less of a supply. And that alone would facilitate cutting back on illegal immigration, at least and hopefully to some significant degree. Next, but just as importantly, consider bringing back law and order and a strict adherence to both, and enforcing that concept with severe, yes, I said it, I said severe consequences for those who defy it. Last, but certainly not least, stop Stop promising a free ride, especially to freeloaders, and remind them that freedom isn't necessarily rather free. If people want free, send them up north. But, there is a but, let them know that even there, free comes with a pretty high price tag. High taxes, for one. Higher than even New York or California, primarily on goods and services. Some provinces, in fact, have taxes as high as 15%. Why? To help facilitate and pay for the so-called free programs, including medical. Secondly, free medical also comes with a high price tag. The high price tag of, often, lack of adequate medical care, including, in many cases, a lack of updated medical equipment and/or a shortage of medical professionals, long wait times, which in many cases leads to those individuals seeking to come to the States and pay out of pocket for the necessary care they can't get at home, which I'm sure many of you have already heard about. And while I hate to admit it, primarily because I am among the most vocal and most in favor of putting an end to the open border and flood of people that, in fact, we can't support and who keep coming over with an obscene agenda, but I have to admit, we are not necessarily victims. Instead, we have allowed ourselves to willfully become victimized. This as a byproduct of allowing ourselves to morph into a self-loathing nation full of individuals heading back to the future. And I don't mean to disparage the movie in any way, shape, or form. It's one of my favorites, a classic, in fact. But these people continue to once again take Timothy Leary's advice to heart. Tune in. They continue to tune in. Tune in to propaganda designed to destroy the independent individual. Turn on. Turn on to an aberrant lifestyle. But most of all, drop out. Drop out of society and as viable members of it, becoming more than willing to hand over the baton in efforts to free themselves from the obligation necessary to maintain our freedoms and the luxuries it affords. Simply to pursue a laid-back life of laziness, apathy, complacency, often an empty, perhaps purposeless, meaningless life that allows and makes it easy for many to live irresponsibly, basically as full-grown, spoiled brat children that give in to their unnecessary and destructive vices. It is now more than ever commonplace, especially for the younger generations among us, to rather than walk or drive somewhere to run their errands, pick up their groceries, food, as well as other goods, to simply take the easy way out. Order online while in the comfort of their living room or bedroom, still in their pajamas, and have it all delivered right to their doorstep. It's actually, in my opinion, quite comical, but also quite sad. And in many situations, definitely ironic that these items, especially food, we opt to have delivered by strangers, people we know nothing about, who they are, where they've been, and whom we desperately tried to avoid and steer clear of for 2 years during COVID. What's next? Hiring someone to chew our food for us? Again, laziness, complacency, and apathy at its best on display all around us. With that in mind, it's easy, at least for me to say, that most people don't give a damn about just about anything and everything, including their own lives and how they live them, excusing and dismissing everything with a less is more and sloppiness is a sign of a life well lived mentality. So why then should these same people give a damn about your life or mine or the decaying direction of the nation? Riddle me that, if you will. Sad, yes, but very, very true, and not worthy of expecting pity or empathy from the rest of us, at least not those of us who tread lightly and carefully. And as my husband says, never start anything others are trying to quit. We are wasting our time, in my opinion anyway, wasting our time by accepting, embracing, and even engaging in this new status quo, by not attempting to redeem these people, but by excusing their bad behavior and crying them a river, simply and because they made poor, often selfish, childish choices, and then expecting the sympathy and kindness of others to what? To bail them out and clean up their mess, the one they bestowed on us too. Let's face it, not everyone is or can be the My Pillow guy and or the select fortunate few like him, and bravo and kudos to them. As I've said, this may be or once have been a free country, but that doesn't mean anyone and everyone has the freedom to throw caution to the wind and destroy it. And that includes our politicians, the unscrupulous leaders who are abusing our freedoms. How? By allowing corrupt individuals to cross our border unnoticed, who are then seeking out to abuse and obstruct the system and take advantage of and destroy the most vulnerable among us. That's exactly what we're seeing right before our very eyes. So bravo. Bravo to the people in charge, those such as Governor Abbott and Governor DeSantis, who are flipping the script, or at least trying to, and sending these people to the doorsteps of those who have sent them to ours. Thus, just to restate, exemplifying what George Washington meant when he told his troops, the enemy has landed, and now the honor and success of America depends on you.